Right now, the world is waking up to news of the death of Pope Francis. We're going to have a local reaction and we'll get a fresh take on his legacy. Also, we're looking at the dangers of working in law enforcement. It has been recently brought to the forefront here in recent days. We're going to talk to a former sergeant with Atlanta PD about what it takes to carry the badge. And is your recycling actually being recycled? Find out what we discovered after one Metro Atlanta man asked us to find out or check it out. This is The Take. Let's get it. Hello and welcome. I'm Chesley McNeil, and this is The Take, where we go above and beyond the headlines and we look at the why and how stories are impacting you and your community. We invite the experts in to give their take, their fresh take on today's top stories, and we try to have a little bit of fun as well as we go along. But first, we start off with breaking news as the world mourns the loss of Pope Francis. He passed away at the age of 88. Francis was elected in 2013 as the 266th Pope, continuing the line going all the way back to the Apostle St. Peter. He was the first Latin American pontiff and the first Jesuit Pope. Francis made only brief public appearances since he was diagnosed being discharged from the hospital after undergoing over 5 weeks of treatment for pneumonia in both lungs. Words of reflection are pouring in for Pope Francis, including from Dr. Bernice King, who posted on Instagram saying, in part, his loss at this time in the state of our world where freedom, justice, and democracy are being daily undermined leaves a huge moral void. Pope Francis, working to the very end, giving a traditional Easter blessing yesterday from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. In his address, the Pope made a strong appeal for peace around the world, particularly in Gaza, and offered prayers to Christian communities around the world. Joining us this morning is Susan Reynolds, Assistant Professor of Catholic Studies at Emory University School of Theology. Susan, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
First, give us your take on the news that you received this morning.
Oh, I was shocked when I woke up. Of course, as you mentioned, Pope Francis actually appeared to the surprise of some yesterday during Easter celebrations. And of course, as we heard as well, he met with the vice president briefly. So to wake up to news that he had passed overnight was quite shocking.
Wow. You know, he was working up to the very end, as we stated, going out even maybe against his doctor's orders, especially with children, that kind of thing. He went out there and he did what he did, right? What he was probably comfortable with doing. Do you think this was the way he wanted to go out?
Oh, absolutely. I think his entire pontificate in some way has been this witness to the joy that he finds in being close to others. He's a very extroverted person. And in some ways, he was always out and about. He was close to particularly those on the margins. He was always close to the suffering. He was close to people who others tended to neglect. Up until the very end, he was with other people.
Mm-hmm. He was doing God's work for about 12 years and with plenty of shifts in the Catholic Church. Break down his legacy. How will he be remembered?
He'll be remembered, of course, as the first pope from the Americas, the first Jesuit pope, the first non-European pope in centuries and centuries, and in a certain way, a very modern kind of pope. He was the first pope since the 1960s not to have participated in a big multi-year reform process called the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. And among other things, people might associate that council with, for example, the Mass, which used to be in Latin everywhere, is now in local languages. And he was the first pope of his era not to be part of that process. So his entire priesthood, his entire pontificate took place in this kind of modern, highly globalized, highly diverse era within the church. And you can see that in his legacy. The cardinals he appointed, for example, were from far-flung areas of the globe. He globalized the church. He brought women and lay people into the hierarchy, the bureaucracy of the church. He was somebody who was in many ways unafraid of the new, the modern, the diverse, the global. He was somebody who welcomed all of that with open arms. And I think people saw that in the way that he participated in dialogue, participated in gatherings of non-Christian leaders, for example. He was somebody who was unafraid of being in solidarity with the world. And I think that's part of the power in his legacy.
Where would he, for lack of a better phrase, stack up against modern popes?
Well, of course, we could never rank modern popes, and in many ways, it would be more appropriate to talk about their similarities. Pope Francis didn't change church doctrine in any meaningful way. But for him, style, I think, was substance. He led with this very personal, very humane, very pastoral way of being, whereas Pope Benedict and John Paul II, his two most immediate predecessors, were philosophers and theologians. They were teachers in some way. He was really a pastor, and you saw that in the way that he always managed to see the individual before him before he saw an issue, for example. And I think that sort of deeply personal, deeply humane approach is part of what made him such a powerful figure across the globe.
Yeah. And now comes the process of trying to come up with a new pope, right? Talk about the process that involves.
Well, the cardinals will convene in Rome. And what's interesting about that, as I mentioned, is that he has appointed more than half, I think around 2/3, if I'm correct, of the current voting cardinals. And so the process will look very different than it did 12 years ago when he was elected in March of 2013. It's a much more global group of individuals, a different generation in some way of individuals. And so at this point, it's really anyone's guess who is next.
Quickly, do you think they'll carry on his type of humanity?
I think so. I think that is inevitable. The power of his witness and of that love and attention for those on the margins, I think, is a lasting legacy in the church.
Susan Reynolds, assistant professor with Catholic Studies at Emory University. Thanks so much for joining us and sharing your insight.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. All right, take care. All right, folks, we're going to have a warm day today. Temperatures will be back into the 80s once again. We had a beautiful Easter Sunday and Monday, Easter Monday, carrying on the same way. We'll have a mix of sun and clouds. There's only a 20% chance for an isolated shower, but that doesn't even come until later on this evening after about 6 or 7 o'clock. We're going to continue in the 80s for much of this week, as you can see. 81 degrees for the high on Tuesday, 30% chance for some scattered showers. That'll be off and on through the day. Continues on Wednesday and Thursday. We'll catch a brief break on Friday, going back down to a 20% chance for rain with 87 degrees for the afternoon high. And then over the weekend, of course, we'll see the rain continuing, the unsettled weather continuing, but temperatures will lower just a little bit back down to 80 by Sunday. All right, folks, don't go anywhere. We're coming back right after this. Welcome back to the show. We're continuing our coverage now of the death this morning of Pope Francis. Joining us now is NBC Washington correspondent Alice Barr. And Alice, welcome back to the show, of course. And we've been talking earlier about the reaction coming in from the death of Pope Francis. We heard from Dr. Bernice King on his passing. Also, one person we're hearing from is Vice President Vance, who met with the Pope just yesterday. Who else are we hearing from passing along their condolences?
Yeah, I mean, these reactions are coming in from every corner of the globe. As you mentioned, from here in Washington, we've heard from the White House and from President Trump, both saying rest in peace. And from Vice President Vance, that's really interesting. I mean, he met with Pope Francis just yesterday. You know, he's saying that his heart goes out to the millions of Christians all over the world who loved him, that he was happy to see him, though he said that he was obviously very ill. And that meeting comes after Pope Francis sharply criticized the Trump administration's mass deportation policies that he said would violate the dignity of migrants. Care for migrants was one of the key tenets of his papacy. But so beyond the leaders here in the U.S., we've heard from those all over Europe, all over the Middle East, because the Pope also spoke a lot about calling for peace, including in Ukraine. We heard from the president of Ukraine, including in Gaza. We heard from Palestinian leaders, the Prime Minister of Israel as well. And so, you know, this is a Pope who had a very far reach, and at times he kind of rattled some traditionalists. He inspired a lot of progressives, but all the messages that are coming in now are speaking about his humility. They're speaking about this legacy of looking out for the least among us, advocating for the poor, the marginalized, for the environment as well, and again calling for peace. And one of the most prominent world leaders we've heard from is the Prime Minister of Italy, most prominent because, of course, that's where the Vatican is home based. She called Pope Francis a friend whose advice and teachings never failed, even in moments of trial and suffering. And this now, of course, is such a moment for millions of Catholics and beyond who are mourning the loss of the people's Pope.
Yeah, just the beginning. I'm sure we'll hear from a lot more. Alice, I want to shift gears with you just a little bit. The New York Times reporting that the defense secretary created another one of those signal messages chats that included his wife and brother. How much hot water is the Pentagon chief in now?
Yeah, so, President Trump has always defended Secretary Hegseth, and we haven't been hearing him speaking out just yet on this. Obviously, there's a lot going on, but I don't think it's likely that he's going to back away from Secretary Hegseth having weathered the first round of this. So far what we've heard from the White House is that there was no wrongdoing and that there was no classified information shared in this signal chat, which, from what we're hearing from sources familiar with knowledge of the matter, is that this was something that was again carried out shortly before the U.S. military strikes on Yemen, and this originally was reported by the New York Times that said that covered in the messages, which included Secretary Hegseth's wife as well as his brother. The brother has a Pentagon job, his wife does not, but that there was discussion of similar things to what we heard about during the, of course, first signal chat that got so much attention when there was that journalist that was accidentally added to a signal text chain. And again, this was about sensitive military information leading up to the U.S. military strikes on Yemen. So I think he's likely to weather this one again, but there are a lot of Democrats calling for him to be pushed out, and it's bringing the whole controversy to the forefront again.
Gotcha. All right, Alice, really appreciate your insight. Take care. All right, we've seen in recent days how dangerous and deadly being a law enforcement officer can be, with several cases causing the headlines, commanding our headlines. Today, a funeral will be held for long-term South Fulton officer and father of three, Lieutenant Elio Garcia. He was killed while on patrol. Investigators say a 31-year-old driver hit his cruiser head-on last Tuesday. Last check, that driver was in critical condition. Garcia's funeral will be held at 1 o'clock at World Changers Church. Two other South Fulton officers are recovering from a shootout on Friday in Fulton Industrial Boulevard. We're told that a suspect opened fire and the officer shot back, killing the suspect. Both officers are expected to survive. Also, last week, two Calhoun police officers stopped a person in a parking lot at Buc-ee's just off of I-75. Investigators say the suspect fired multiple shots at the officers before turning the gun on himself. Fortunately, no officers were injured in that incident. Joining us now is Tanya Austin, retired 2 years ago as sergeant at the Atlanta Police Department. She has also served as the official historian for APD. Good morning to you, Tanya. Welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you.
When you hear these headlines, what's your take on it right away?
My initial take, first and foremost, if you don't mind, I'd like to offer my condolences.
All right. Yeah, we seem to be having a little bit of an issue with a former officer Austin's signal there, but she was giving us her take on the fallen police officer and these recent headlines that we have been dealing with. Hey, we're going to take a quick break, try to fix that. We'll be back right after this. All right, welcome back. We were just talking to Tanya Austin, retired sergeant with the Atlanta Police Department. We were talking about those headlines, Tanya, and when you hear about all this, folks shooting at officers, an officer dying in a car crash, tell us what your initial take on this is.
Good morning, and thank you for having me, Chesley. My initial take is that it's a weight placed on law enforcement nationally, but certainly in our local area. It just causes you to think more about the dangers of the job on a daily basis and just how fragile life is. But I'm always faced with a flurry of thoughts about that officer and praying for the colleagues officer and for the family who will feel the loss from the event.
Yeah. Do you think being an officer is getting more dangerous these days? Okay. All right, we seem to be having some issues again with Officer Austin's signal there. We'll get back to her as soon as we can. Let's move on. What really happens when you roll out that blue bin to the curb, you know, the recycling bin? Americans generate more than 4 pounds of trash a day, but most of that, can it be recycled? Or is it being recycled? In Georgia, just 13% of recyclables actually get recycled. One Dunwoody man asked 11Alive, is my recycling really making a difference? Caitlin Ross joins us now with a behind the scenes look at this. And Caitlin, this turned into quite a journey, huh?
It did. It's actually a super interesting question. We got it kind of sporadically, like what actually happens to our recycling? Does it actually get recycled? And people had a really low level of confidence, thinking that they were putting in all of this effort to recycle their stuff from their house, but then on the back end, where did it end up? So Pete wrote into us to ask exactly that. He wrote into the 11Alive inbox and says, what's going on? And if it is being recycled, prove it. Take a listen.
I'd like to hear what happens. I'd like to know. I'd like to be convinced. I'd like for somebody to admit one way or the other whether it's happening or not.
And I like Pete there. He says he'd like to be convinced. And so we kind of went on this behind the scenes journey to find out exactly what happens with the recycling in DeKalb County.
So tell us, what's the process like?
So everybody knows you roll your little blue bin to the end of the driveway every, Thursday if it's collected at your house on Thursdays. And then there are specific recycling trucks that pick up that recycling. They bring it to a sorting center in DeKalb County, and then they ship it off on a truck. It goes 22 miles out to Conyers. DeKalb County actually contracts with Pratt Recycling. They're responsible for sorting it. So Pete's big question was, you dump all of this together in the blue bin, but how does it actually get sorted? So Pratt Recycling is the agency that does all of that sorting, and then they have to provide metrics back to the county to show how much is recycled and then how much is thrown away. If they throw it away, they can't recycle it, then DeKalb County should be getting money back for that refuse that does not make it into the recycling stream.
Was he just curious as to whether it was going, or was it a concern of his as to why he brought this to you?
So Pete is a super recycler, I would call him. When we went to his garage, it was actually full of recycling. He goes and tells his neighbors every week, go ahead and drop off your styrofoam, your plastic, your coffee containers, anything that you want to make sure gets recycled, drop it off in my garage. And then he spends an enormous amount of time sorting it to make sure that it actually gets where it needs to go. And the items that he thinks are really difficult to recycle, like styrofoam, for example, he brings that to Charm, which is a place in DeKalb County that deals exclusively with really difficult to recycle materials. So Pete really wants to make sure that the recycling ends up in the recycling stream, so it's personal for him. He said at one point during our interview, the whole world is going to be junk if we don't do something about it.
Wow.
And so he's really committed to doing something about it.
I like him. I like him. I
He's
teach
great.
environmental science, and I try to teach my kids this as well. But a lot of us don't follow this process like Pete does, right?
Right.
I mean, so what's the process for us?
So it's changed a lot. So before COVID, there was a really good tradition of people recycling. And then during COVID in DeKalb County in particular, they just got hit with these really huge shortages of employees during the pandemic. So they decided to commingle the garbage and recycling. And that's when a lot of people lost confidence. So people were looking out their window and they were seeing the trash truck and the recycling truck just dump everything together. And then the recycling was not getting sorted. So the numbers just plummeted. We went through and saw an audit that DeKalb County did. I really have to applaud the commissioners because they heard from residents that this was happening. They did an audit and the audit found that to be true. So the audit recommended a couple of different things, but one of the main ones was having a different garbage truck and recycling truck. So it's no longer the same truck that comes around. There are 6 trucks that are dedicated specifically to recycling, and that's really so residents have a larger degree of confidence that this is ending up where it needs to be.
Okay, all right. Will there be another audit quickly?
Yes, there is going to be another audit in May or June after they can really reassess those numbers to make sure that things are going where they need to go.
Okay, sounds good. Caitlin Ross, always on top of it. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Chesley.
We pay for this service. I want it done. I want it done. Thanks so much. All right, you can watch Caitlin's full report tonight during 11Alive News at 11 and right here on 11Alive Plus. Man, can't wait to hear more about that. Hey, don't go anywhere, folks. We got much more for you coming up after the break. All right, welcome back to the show. We've been trying to talk to former APD police officer Tanya Austin, and I believe we have her on the line right now. Tanya, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, all right. Last question we asked you was, do you think law enforcement is getting more dangerous?
I think law enforcement has always been dangerous. I just think we have factors now that contribute to more guns on the street, and the dangers are contributed by more guns and less access to mental health care. But it's always been a dangerous job.
Mm-hmm. Do you think changes need to be made on one side or the other? Would it be with the officers? Would it be with regular citizens?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, changes. Do you think changes need to be made? Changes with the way officers are trained, or maybe even with citizens, or getting some awareness to citizens?
So I think training is always a good thing. However, there are small things that we all can do. I think we can all be more attentive to our surroundings. I think that there's so many distractions that we miss some of the signs, body language and sounds and things that indicate that we are approaching danger. We're just and
all right. Once again, we're having some problems with the audio there. Let's take a look at our 7-day outlook. And well, first of all, let me show you the forecast track model. It shows that we'll get some rain in here later on tonight. This is after about 8 o'clock or so. The rain pushes in, and that rain will be with us, unfortunately, right on through Tuesday, off and on as we head through the day. Today, at least, we'll be on the dry side. Again, that rain doesn't come in until tonight. 85 degrees will be our forecast high for today. We're going to remain in the 80s on your Tuesday. In fact, we'll rain there all week long. Our weather will remain unsettled as well. We'll be looking at the 20 to 30% chance for some isolated or scattered showers to pop up off and on as we head through Thursday. By the time we get to Friday, I think we'll catch a little bit of a brief break. It's only a 20% chance, and then a 30% chance will continue on Saturday. We'll cool off a little bit on Sunday with only a 20% chance for some scattered showers to be around the forecast area. So unsettled weather this week, unlike last week where we were dry, but our temperatures will stay on the warm side. We should be in the mid-70s this time of year. We're going to average the mid-80s for much of this week. So if you like it hot, folks, or like it very warm, you got it this week. All right, before we go, folks, my final take. There's nothing like a mother's love. Yep. And in the NBA, when I say Curry, most likely you're going to think about Steph Curry, but there's another Curry out there, about his brother, Seth Curry. Seth Curry plays in the NBA as well, but for the same team their father played for, the Charlotte Hornets. Now, overshadowed often by his famous older brother, Seth doesn't get much recognition, but this past NBA season, Seth was named the best three-point shooter of the year. And although it didn't come with much fanfare, Seth's mother, Sonia, took to social media to encourage her son. She said, "I'm so proud of you," she wrote. She said, you should continue to excel and leave your mark in the NBA in your own way. I love you. That's what I'm talking about. Nothing like a mother's love. And even though he's overshadowed by his older brother who's in the playoffs and he's not, he did get a scoring title, right? He did get a three-point title, something that his older brother is known for. Right? And it took his mom to give him that encouragement. That's what I'm talking about, folks. Nothing like a mother's love, right? That's all we have for you today, folks. Try to be like Sonia Curry and encourage somebody today. Have a great one.